My wife and I bought 14 acres on the eastern side of Deckers Creek in Preston County, West Virginia, in the fall of 2019, which is the kind of decision that sounds romantic when you describe it to people at dinner parties, but is mostly a series of arguments with title companies and a slow education in the particular stubbornness of land that hasn't been properly surveyed since the Carter administration. The parcel sat along Route 7 between Masontown and Reedsville, up a gravel access road that gained about 400 feet of elevation in a quarter mile, the kind of grade that made our Subaru work in a way that felt personal. Our nearest neighbor was a man named Gerald Pruitt, who lived in a double-wide, set back into a clearing maybe 300 yards through the tree line to our south. I say nearest because there was no one else for almost a mile in any direction. One of the reasons we bought the place. Gerald was in his late 60s, retired from the Albright Power Station, and he introduced himself the second day we were out there by walking up our drive with a paper bag containing 6 ears of corn and a jar of what he called pepper relish, which turned out to be extraordinary. He was the kind of neighbor you hope for in a rural purchase, friendly but not intrusive, knowledgeable about the land without being proprietary about it, willing to tell you where the spring runoff would pool in March so you didn't put your septic field in the wrong place. For the first year and a half, Gerald was a comfort. He'd wave from his TV when he passed on the logging road that ran between our properties. He told me which mechanic in Kingwood was honest and which one would quote you for parts he didn't install. He let us know when he was going to be burning brush, so we wouldn't call the fire department. The relationship had the easy, practical warmth that develops between rural neighbors who respect each other's privacy but understand that isolation creates a kind of mutual dependency. You check on each other not out of nosiness, but because in a place where the nearest ambulance is 40 minutes away, looking out for your neighbor is simply how you stay alive. The shift began in the spring of 2021. And I want to be careful here because I've gone over this many times and I still can't identify a single triggering event. It was cumulative. The way water damage is cumulative. You don't see the moment the beam starts to rot, you just eventually notice the floor is soft. The first thing I registered was Gerald's truck. He drove a white Ford F-250, probably an 08 or 09. With a toolbox bolted into the bed and a faded NRA sticker on the rear window. I'd started noticing it parked at the junction where our access road met the county road, not pulled off to the side the way you'd park if you were checking your mailbox or waiting for someone, but facing up the hill toward our place. Engine off, Gerald sitting in the cab. The first time I saw it, I waved and he waved back and I thought nothing of it. The second time, maybe a week later, I slowed down and asked if everything was okay. And he said he was just resting his eyes, which is a thing people say and a thing people do. So I accepted it. The third time was at dusk, and his headlights were off, and I only saw the truck because my own headlights swept across the white paint as I made the turn. I mentioned it to my wife Laura, and she said what any reasonable person would say, which is that a retired man in a rural area has a limited number of places to sit, and maybe the junction was his spot. I agreed with her. I wanted to agree with her. Then the property markers started appearing, small orange flags on wire stakes, the kind surveyors use, pushed into the ground along what would have been the tree line between our properties. I hadn't ordered a survey. Laura hadn't ordered a survey. I walked down and looked at them. There were 11. Spaced about 40 feet apart, running in a line that was roughly, but not exactly where I understood our property boundary to be. The flags were new, the wire still bright. I pulled one up and looked at it. There was no surveyor's mark, no company name, no reference number, just an orange flag on a wire stake. The kind you can buy in packs of 100 at Lowe's for $12. I went to talk to Gerald about it. He was on his porch, which was a concrete slab with a metal awning and 2 plastic chairs that had faded from green to a color that was almost white. I asked him if he'd had a survey done. He looked at me with an expression I still think about, not hostile, not confused, but patient. The way you'd look at someone who had asked a question you'd been expecting. He said no. He said he didn't know anything about any flags. He said the property line was where it had always been. And then he said something that I wrote down later that night because it bothered me. I know where your line is, Aaron. I've always known where your line is. The emphasis was on the word your, slight but deliberate. The kind of inflection that changes a sentence from reassurance into something else entirely. Over the following weeks, I began finding other things. A trail camera zip-tied to an oak about 60 feet inside our property line, pointed at the path Lavra used for her morning runs. The camera was a Browning Strike Force, decent model. Set to motion-activated photo and video, I removed it and brought it inside. The SD card had 412 images on it, spanning 3 weeks. Most were deer, turkey, a coyote. 47 were Lavra, running past in the morning, walking the dog in the afternoon, in one image, taken at 2:47 a.m. on a Tuesday. There was a human figure standing in the frame about 20 feet from the camera. The figure was facing the camera directly. The infrared flash had caught the reflective tape on a pair of work boots. Gerald wore work boots with reflective tape on the heels. I know this because I'd noticed them once when he was climbing off his ATV. And I'd thought it was a smart safety measure for a man his age walking rural roads at night. I called the Preston County Sheriff's Office. A deputy came out, looked at the camera, looked at the images, and told me that unless I could prove Gerald had placed it, which I could not, because I hadn't seen him do it, there wasn't much they could do. He suggested I talk to Gerald directly. I told him I didn't think that was a good idea anymore. The deputy looked at me the way law enforcement looks at you when your problem is real, but doesn't fit into a category they can act on. And he gave me a card for the magistrate's office and said I could pursue a harassment complaint if I wanted to document a pattern. The pattern continued. I found boot prints in the soft ground near our bedroom window after a rain. The tread pattern consistent with a Danner work boot, size 11 or 12, pressed deep enough to suggest someone had stood there for a while, not walked past. I found a gate on our fence that I'd latched the night before standing open in the morning. Not broken, not forced, just unlatched, the way it would be if someone had simply lifted the handle and walked through. I found a note in our mailbox, not mailed, no stamp, no address, just a folded piece of lined paper with a pencil drawing of our house. The drawing was accurate. It included the new curtains Laura had hung in the kitchen the previous weekend. The detail that still keeps me awake is the smallest one. One morning in late June, I went out to our tool shed to get the push mower, and the shed was unlocked. Always lock it. The mower was where I'd left it. The gas can was where I'd left it. The shelf of hand tools was undisturbed, but on the workbench, centered precisely, was a photograph, a Polaroid. It showed the interior of our living room at night, taken from what would have been the hallway that leads to the bedrooms. The television was on. You could see the blue light on the couch. Asleep under a blanket was Lavra. We moved out of the house within a week and listed the property at a loss. The sheriff's office opened an investigation that, as of the last time I checked, has produced no charges. Gerald Pruitt still lives in the double wide. The property has not sold. I drive Route 7 sometimes when I'm visiting Laura's parents in Morgantown. And I take the long way around now, adding 20 minutes to the trip so I don't pass the junction. It's not a decision I make consciously anymore. My hands just turn the wheel. The body remembers what the mind would rather set aside, and some knowledge, once it enters you, becomes a permanent resident. It takes up space. It rearranges the furniture, and it never pays rent. And you learn to live with it, the way you learn to live with the sound in the walls that could be pipes or could be something else. Something you will never open the wall to check, because knowing would be worse than wondering if this story resonated with you. Please consider subscribing to Fear Begins and hitting the like button. Share this video with someone who enjoys these kinds of stories. I'd also love to know. Drop a comment and tell me where you're listening from. Your support means everything to me and keeps these stories coming. Now let's continue. I spent 11 years in the same rented house on Sycamore Street in Irwin, Tennessee, a town that sits in the narrow valley where the Nolichucky River bends through Unicoi County, pressed between the ridges of the Unaka Mountains on one side and the long shoulder of the Appalachian Trail corridor on the other. Irwin is the kind of town where most of the houses were built between 1940 and 1970, and most of them haven't changed much since. And the house I rented was no exception. A 2-bedroom frame house with aluminum siding that had been painted white sometime in the previous decade and was now the particular gray-white that aluminum siding becomes when it gives up pretending. My neighbor to the east was a woman named Denise Garland, and she had lived in her house since before I moved in and, I assume, still lives there now. Denise was perhaps 55 when I first met her, a retired school bus driver for the Unicoi County system, and she had the particular social energy of a person who has spent decades being responsible for other people's children and has transferred that vigilance onto her surroundings. She knew every car that belonged on the street, and she knew every car that didn't. She knew when the garbage trucks ran late. She knew which dogs were licensed and which weren't. This kind of neighbor is common in small Appalachian towns, and they serve a function. They are the informal surveillance system of a community that doesn't have the tax base for much formal surveillance. And most of the time their attention is a net positive. Denise brought me a casserole the day I moved in. Chicken and rice, foil covered, still warm. She stood on my porch and told me the history of my house, who had lived there before, what they'd done for work, why they'd left. She told me the previous tenant had been a man named Dale, who worked at the CSX rail yard in Johnson City, and who had moved to Kingsport for a woman. And the way she said "for a woman" carried an entire editorial. I thanked her for the casserole, and we had the kind of introductory conversation that establishes the basic treaty of neighborliness. I'll keep my yard decent. You let me know if there's ever a problem. We wave when we see each other. For the first several years, the treaty held. Denise was attentive, but within the range I'd call normal. She'd mention if she saw a car she didn't recognize in my driveway. She'd bring my garbage cans up from the curb if I forgot. She commented once that I'd been getting a lot of packages, which was true. I'd started buying used vinyl records online, and she said it in a tone that was curious rather than accusatory. So I explained, and she nodded, and that was that. I am a private person by nature and by profession. I worked as a pharmacy technician at the Walgreens on Main Street, and pharmacy work trains you to be careful with information, to notice what's your business and what isn't, to handle the intimate details of strangers' health with a kind of practiced neutrality. I applied this same principle to my home life. I was polite to Denise, but I did not invite her in. I did not share details about my relationships or my family or my schedule beyond what was naturally observable. This was not unfriendliness, it was simply the boundary I maintained with everyone. The shift when it came was so gradual that I can only reconstruct it in retrospect. The way you realize you've been gaining weight, not because you noticed any single meal, but because one day your clothes don't fit. Denise began referencing things she shouldn't have known. She mentioned that I'd been homesick on a Wednesday. I had, but I hadn't told her, and my car had been in the garage, so she couldn't have seen it in the driveway. She asked me how my mother was doing after her surgery, and my mother had just had a knee replacement. But I had told no one in Irwin about it. I'd told my coworker Brenda on the phone, standing in my kitchen. I want to be precise about that, because precision matters here. I had told Brenda on the phone, standing in my kitchen, and my kitchen window faced Denise's house. And the window had been open, because it was September, and I didn't run the air conditioning past Labor Day. But the distance between my kitchen window and Denise's nearest window was perhaps 30 feet. And I had not been speaking loudly. The only way she could have known about my mother's surgery was if she had been listening with an intention that exceeded the casual overhearing of a nearby neighbor. I began paying attention in the way that pharmacy work had taught me, systematically. Without showing it, I started noting the things Denise said to me and checking them against what she could have reasonably known. She knew I'd ordered Thai food on a Friday. She knew my friend Marcus had visited from Knoxville. She knew I'd been having trouble sleeping, which she mentioned as concern. "You've been up late. I've seen your light." And this was technically possible. My bedroom window faced her house, but the specificity of it, the way she said it with the soft familiarity of someone who had been monitoring a condition, unsettled me. Then the casserole dishes started. Not the food, the dishes themselves. Denise would bring food periodically, as she always had, and I would wash the dish and return it. But I began finding her dishes in my house in places I hadn't put them. A Pyrex baking dish in my cabinet that I didn't own but recognized as hers. A ceramic bowl on my counter that had been there when I came home from work, washed and empty. Sitting on a paper towel, I had not left it there. The door had been locked. I checked the windows, all closed, all latched. But the back door, I realized, had a lock that could be opened with a flathead screwdriver if you knew the trick of it. The particular wiggle and lift that defeated the mechanism. The kind of thing a person would know if they'd lived next to this house for 20 years and had perhaps watched Dale or the tenant before Dale deal with the same faulty lock. I changed the lock. I installed a deadbolt. The dishes stopped appearing inside the house. Instead, I'd find them on my porch, my back step. The seat of the lawn chair I kept beside my side door. Once, balanced on the hood of my car, always clean. Always empty, always without explanation. I confronted Denise as gently as I could. I told her I appreciated her generosity, but I'd been finding dishes I didn't remember receiving. She looked at me with genuine confusion, or what I interpreted as genuine confusion, and said she must have dropped them off and I'd forgotten. She said I'd been looking tired. She said I should eat more. She said, "I worry about you in there by yourself." The in there is what stayed with me, not over there, not next door. In there, as if the interior of my house was a place she knew, a space she had a relationship with, a room she had stood in recently enough to choose the preposition with familiarity. The final event was in March of my 11th year. I came home from a closing shift at the pharmacy. I'd worked until 10, and my house smelled like food. Specifically, it smelled like the chicken and rice casserole Denise had brought me the day I moved in. The same recipe, the same smell. I walked into my kitchen, and there it was, sitting on my counter, foil covered, still warm. The new deadbolt had been locked when I'd arrived. The windows were closed. There was no sign of forced entry. Beside the casserole was a handwritten note on a torn piece of paper that said, "You missed dinner. I made your favorite." I had never told Denise what my favorite food was. The chicken and rice casserole was her recipe, her default, the thing she brought to every new neighbor. She had decided it was my favorite. She had decided this, and she had entered my house, and she had cooked in my kitchen or brought the cooking into my kitchen, and she had written a note that framed this as care, as love, as the kind of thing a person does for someone they are responsible for. I moved out of the Sycamore Street house the following month. I didn't say goodbye to Denise. I loaded a U-Haul on a Monday morning while she was at a doctor's appointment. I knew her schedule by then, the way she knew mine, and I drove to Johnson City and signed a lease on an apartment complex where the neighbors are separated by concrete walls, and I don't know any of their names. The Nolichucky still runs through Irwin, brown and steady. In the summer, swollen and urgent in March. And somewhere on Sycamore Street, a casserole is cooling on a counter in a house where someone new has just moved in and doesn't yet know the cost of that kindness. I grew up in Breathitt County, Kentucky, which is deep enough into the eastern coal country that people who live there don't say they're from Kentucky. They say they're from Breathitt County, or from Jackson, or from Quicksand or Van Cleve, or Lost Creek, because the specificity matters and because lumping the hollows of the upper Kentucky River with Lexington or Louisville would be like calling the bottom of the ocean the beach. My family's property was 12 acres up Wolf Branch, a tributary drainage so narrow that the road and the creek were the same thing for about a quarter mile in the spring. And the house sat on a bench of flat ground that my great-grandfather had carved out of the hillside with a team of mules. In 1934, our nearest neighbor was a man everyone called Haas. Though his real name was Howard Sizemore, Haas lived alone in a house he'd built himself on the opposite side of the branch, maybe 200 yards upstream. He was a large man, not fat but dense, the kind of build that comes from decades of physical labor. He'd worked timber most of his life, running a chainsaw for various small operations in Perry and Knott and Breathitt counties. By the time I was old enough to form clear memories of him, he was in his 50s and semi-retired, living on disability for a back injury and supplementing with odd jobs, firewood cutting, fence repair, the kind of pickup truck economy that sustains a lot of people in the hollows. Haas had a woodpile. I say this like it's a notable fact, and in most places it wouldn't be. But Haas's woodpile was something beyond the ordinary stacking of split hardwood that every household in the hollow maintained for heating. His pile ran the entire length of his property frontage, maybe 150 feet, and stood 8 feet tall in places, stacked with a precision that approached masonry, oak, hickory, poplar, cherry, the occasional locust, all of it split, all of it stacked bark side up for shedding, all of it organized by species in a system that only Haas understood, but that he maintained with a devotion that went past practical and into something I didn't have a word for as a child. My father said Haas was eccentric. My mother said Haas was lonely. My grandmother, who had known him since he was a boy, said Haas was tetched, which in Breathitt County carries a specific connotation, not dangerous, not mentally ill in a way that required intervention, but touched by something, turned slightly from the grain of ordinary behavior. She said it with a kindness that suggested she believed being tetched was not entirely Haas's fault and not entirely a bad thing. I was 14 when I started noticing the woodpile's relationship to our property. I'd always known it was big. What I hadn't realized, because I'd grown up with it, and you don't notice the strangeness of things you've always seen, was that it was growing, not seasonally, in the way a woodpile grows before winter and shrinks through it. Growing continuously, Haas was adding to it faster than he or anyone could possibly burn it, even in the deepest Breathitt County winters, even if he heated his house to 90 degrees from October to April, and it was growing in our direction. The pile had extended past his property line and along the edge of the branch, following the creek bank toward our house. My father noticed it the same summer I did and walked up to talk to Haas about it. He came back an hour later and said Haas had been perfectly friendly and had promised to move the wood back to his side. 2 weeks later, the pile had not receded. It had extended another 15 feet. The wood was beautiful. I want to acknowledge that because it's relevant to how we failed to take the situation seriously for as long as we did. Each piece was cut to a uniform 16 inches and split clean, the faces showing the particular grain patterns of whatever species it was, and the stacking was so tight and plumb that you could have run a level along the face and found it true. There was an artistry to it that made you reluctant to call it a problem. It was like complaining about a cathedral being built too close to your yard. By the time I was 16, the woodpile had reached our fence line. My father spoke to Haas again and again. Each time, Haas was agreeable and understanding, and each time the wood continued its advance. It came through the fence, not by knocking it down, but by absorbing it, the posts and wire becoming internal structures within the growing mass of stacked hardwood. I remember the morning I walked out and could no longer see the branch from our yard because the wall of wood blocked the view entirely. It was 8 feet high and solid, a timber fortification running from Haas's property to the edge of our driveway, and it had happened so slowly that its completion felt less like an event than like a season arriving. What disturbed my father and what he mentioned to me one evening on the porch in the way that parents mention things to teenagers when they want to say something out loud without fully committing to the alarm it implies, was the interior structure. He'd looked into a gap where two rows met and seen that the pile was not solid. There were channels inside it, spaces, not random gaps from imperfect stacking but deliberate voids, roofed with flat pieces of poplar and floored with bark slabs, running laterally through the pile like tunnels in an ant colony. He'd shone a flashlight into one, and it had gone back further than the beam reached. I looked myself the next day. He was right. The woodpile had an interior architecture. The channels were roughly 2 feet high and 18 inches wide. Too small for a person to walk through, but not too small for a person to crawl through. They ran in directions I couldn't map from the outside, branching and connecting in a pattern that suggested planning. In one channel, about 4 feet in, I found a coffee can with a screw-on lid. Inside the can was a spiral notebook. The notebook was filled, front to back, with pencil entries, dates, times, and descriptions. Descriptions of us: my father leaving for work at 6:15, my mother hanging lawn dash at 3 o'clock, me getting off the school bus at 3:47. 3 years of entries, organized by family member, cross-referenced by day of the week. The handwriting was small and careful and consistent, the penmanship of a man who had treated this work with the same precision he applied to his stacking. My father called the sheriff. The sheriff came out and looked at the woodpile and looked at the notebook and said that the wood on our property was a civil matter and the notebook was concerning but not criminal. And he suggested we talk to a lawyer about the property encroachment. He did not seem to understand what we were telling him. Or perhaps he understood and simply had no mechanism for responding to it, no form to fill out, no statute that covered a neighbor who had spent 3 years building an observation structure out of firewood. We left Breathitt County that winter. My parents moved to Richmond, where my father's sister lived, and I finished high school at Madison Central. Haas, to my knowledge, is still on Wolf Branch. The woodpile, to my knowledge, is still growing. My father tried one more time to talk to Haas before we left. He walked up the branch on a Saturday morning, and Haas was working the pile as he always was, splitting a round of white oak with a maul, the steel ringing off the grain in that hollow, particular sound that carries for miles in Breathitt County air. My father told him we were moving. Haas set the maul down and looked at him and said he was sorry to hear that. He said we'd been good neighbors. He said it with what my father described as genuine sadness, the kind of sadness that confused my father more than hostility would have, because it suggested that Haas understood the relationship between his behavior and our departure and was grieved by the outcome without being willing to change the behavior that caused it. My father asked him about the notebook. Haas said he didn't know what notebook my father was talking about. His face, my father said, showed nothing, not deception, not confusion, nothing at all, as if the question had arrived from a language. He didn't speak, and he was waiting politely for translation. We drove out of Breathitt County on a Tuesday in November, the truck loaded, the hollow behind us narrowing in the rearview mirror until the trees closed over the road and there was nothing to see. My mother cried. My father drove with both hands on the wheel and his jaw set in the particular way it set when he was angry about something he couldn't fix. I sat in the back seat and watched the ridgeline and thought about the woodpile and the channels inside it and the notebook with its 3 years of entries, each date and time a small act of attention that multiplied across 1,000 days, became something I still don't have an adequate name for some nights. When I am very tired and the part of my mind that keeps things organized loosens its grip, I think about those channels. I think about a man crawling through them in the dark, navigating by feel through a maze he'd built over years, moving toward the gaps he'd left facing our windows. I think about what a person becomes when they have that much patience, and that much wood, and that much time. I think about the artistry of it, the care, the precision of the stacking, and how the most disturbing thing about Haas was not that he was watching us, but that he loved the watching. That he had made the watching into a craft, the way another man might build furniture or carve birds from basswood, and how the line between devotion and obsession is not a line at all, but a spectrum, and you don't always know where you are on it until someone finds the notebook. The branch still runs in the spring. I can hear it if I try. I taught 6th grade at Coburn Elementary in Wise County, Virginia for 22 years. And in that time I developed the particular stamina that public school teachers in small Appalachian districts develop, the ability to care deeply about children who face difficulties you cannot fix, to work within systems that are always underfunded and occasionally hostile, and to drive mountain roads in weather that would close schools in places where the terrain doesn't require you to gain 800 feet of elevation between your house and your classroom. My house was on Route 72 between Coburn and Wise, a 2-story farmhouse that I'd bought from the estate of a woman named Hazel Mullins in 2006. And the property included about 3 acres of relatively flat bottomland along the Guest River. The neighbor who concerns this story lived on the adjacent lot, a smaller parcel with a modular home that had been placed there sometime in the late 1990s. His name was Randall. I'll use his first name only, because as far as I know, he still lives there, and I have no interest in a confrontation. Randall was in his early 40s when I moved in, unemployed as far as I could tell, and he kept a garden. The garden is the curtain. The garden is the center of this. It was large, perhaps a 1/4 acre, and it was immaculate. Raised beds built from pressure-treated lumber, drip irrigation on timers, a deer fence made from metal posts and woven wire that must have cost several $100, tomatoes, peppers, beans, squash, lettuce, herbs, a small greenhouse made from PVC pipe and plastic sheeting. Compost bins, 3 of them, in various stages of decomposition, turned regularly. The garden was the most organized and intentional thing on Randall's property, which was otherwise cluttered with the accumulation of a person who acquires things without discarding them. Truck parts, lumber scraps, rolls of fencing, plastic totes stacked under tarps. I admired the garden initially. I told him so. He responded with the brief, flat acknowledgement of a person who does not garden for the pleasure of conversation about gardening. Randall was not friendly in the way that rural neighbors in Southwest Virginia typically are. He did not wave, did not bring food, did not stop to talk about weather or road conditions. He was present and he was watchful. And there is a difference between a neighbor who is private and a neighbor who is watching. And it took me longer than it should have to recognize which one Randall was. The first year, I noticed that Randall's garden rows were oriented toward my house. This is not inherently meaningful. Garden rows follow sun exposure, drainage, and the shape of the plot and his plot's geometry made east-west rows the logical choice. And my house was to the east, but the beds nearest my property were planted with tall crops, pole beans on 8-foot trellises, sunflowers, corn, and they formed a screen that blocked the view from his garden into the road while leaving a clear sight line from inside the garden toward my house. He could see me, but no one driving past could see him. The second year, I noticed the schedule. Randall was in his garden whenever I was in my yard. Not sometimes, whenever. If I went out to mow at 8 in the morning on a Saturday, he was already there, kneeling in the dirt, hands in the soil, facing my direction. If I came home at 4 on a Tuesday and walked out to check my mail, he would emerge from between the rows within a minute, carrying a hoe or a watering can, positioned at the edge nearest my property. The correlation was too consistent to be coincidence, and I began testing it. I'd step outside at random times, 6 a.m., 10 p.m., 2 in the afternoon on a Wednesday, and within 5 minutes, Randall would appear in the garden. I installed a motion-activated floodlight on the side of my house facing his property. The next morning, I found the bulb unscrewed. Not broken, unscrewed, I screwed it back in. The next morning, unscrewed again. This continued for a week. A silent exchange conducted entirely through the rotation of a light bulb. until I replaced the fixture with one that required a tool to access the bulb. The light stayed on after that, and Randall stopped coming to the nearest edge of his garden at night. But during the day, the pattern continued. The garden itself began to change in ways I found difficult to describe to anyone who hadn't seen it. Because the changes were subtle and required knowledge of what had been there before, he started planting in patterns. Not agricultural patterns, visual patterns. I realized one morning, looking down from my second-floor bedroom window, that the arrangement of red and yellow pepper plants in his nearest bed spelled something. I stared at it for a long time. The letters were imperfect, formed by the gaps between plants rather than the plants themselves. The way a word can be hidden in the negative space of an image. It spelled my last name. I went to the Wise County Sheriff's Office and filed a report. The deputy who came out looked at the garden from my window, squinted, and said he could see how I might read letters in the pattern, but that he wasn't sure it wasn't just the irregular spacing of plants in a garden. He was not wrong that it required interpretation. He was wrong that the interpretation was unreasonable. I showed him photographs I'd taken over the previous weeks, the way the pattern had developed deliberately, how the spacing between certain plants had been adjusted. I could see the disturbed soil where seedlings had been transplanted. To refine the letter forms, the deputy wrote something in his notebook and said he'd include it in the file and that I should call if anything escalated, which is the kind of thing law enforcement says when they understand your concern intellectually, but have no procedural mechanism for addressing a man who writes your name in vegetables. The garden grew more elaborate each season. Trellises went higher, structures appeared, a tool shed, then a covered work area with a roof made from corrugated metal and open sides that faced my property. Then what I can only describe as a viewing platform. A raised wooden deck in the center of the garden that brought Randall's eye level above the fence line and gave him an unobstructed view of my kitchen, my bedroom windows, my back porch. He'd stand up there in the early evening, motionless, holding a cup of something, looking at my house with the calm attention of a man watching a television program he particularly enjoys. I timed him once from behind my curtain. 47 minutes without moving, without drinking from the cup, without shifting his weight. The stillness was not relaxation, it was focus. I began finding things on my property that I hadn't put there, small things, placed with a care that suggested intention rather than accident. A ripe tomato on my porch railing, still warm from the sun, a bundle of herbs, basil, I think tied with twine and laid on the driver's seat of my car, which I'd left unlocked. A folded piece of paper tucked into the frame of my screen door that contained a hand-drawn diagram of my backyard, rendered in detailed pencil, showing my garden beds, my chairs, my clothesline, and a small X that corresponded to the exact location where I typically sat on summer evenings to read. The X was labeled, in small block letters, "She sits here, I." Sold the farmhouse in 2019. I teach in Abingdon now, and I live in an apartment with no ground floor windows facing any neighboring property. The Guest River still runs clear through the bottomland behind the house I used to own, and somewhere beside it, a garden grows in patterns that mean something to the man who tends it and nothing to anyone else. And I wonder sometimes about the person who bought the house, and whether they've looked down from the second floor window, and whether they've started counting the minutes between stepping outside and hearing the particular sound of a garden gate opening next door. I worked as a radio technician for a small communications company based out of Hazard, Kentucky, servicing the tower infrastructure across a 5-county region in the southeastern part of the state. Perry, Knott, Letcher, Leslie, and Harlan counties. The work involved maintaining and repairing the relay towers that sit on ridgetops throughout the mountains, the kind of infrastructure that most people never think about, but that makes cell coverage and emergency radio function in terrain where the valleys are too deep and the ridges too numerous for signals to travel cleanly. I did this work for 9 years, and in that time I developed a comprehensive mental map of the radio environment of the region, which frequencies were active, which were allocated but silent, which carried the particular static patterns of atmospheric interference versus equipment malfunction. When you spend enough time listening to radio frequencies in mountain terrain, you develop an ear for the landscape itself, for the way a signal bounces and distorts based on the geology between the transmitter and your receiver. I lived alone in a small house on Kingdom Come Creek in Letcher County, a few miles south of Whitesburg, in a hollow so narrow that the road ran on one side of the creek and the handful of houses sat on the other side, connected by short bridges made from steel I-beams and timber planking. My nearest neighbor was across the creek and about 100 yards upstream, a man in his 70s named Chester, who had been a miner at the Scotia mine before it closed, and who now spent his days in a way that I understood to be common among retired miners in Letcher County. Slowly, deliberately, with a lot of time on the porch and a detailed awareness of everything that happened in the hollow, Chester had a radio setup. This was not unusual. Amateur radio is common in eastern Kentucky, partly as a hobby and partly as practical communication in an area where cell service remains unreliable. What was unusual was the extent of it. He had antennas on his roof, multiple arrays, including what looked like a Yagi directional antenna pointed, as far as I could estimate from across the creek, roughly toward my house. He had a second antenna, a vertical whip, mounted on a pole behind his house, and he had a third, smaller antenna on a mast that he adjusted manually, the direction changing day to day. Sometimes multiple times a day, I noticed the antennas before I noticed anything else. The way a plumber notices pipes and a carpenter notices joinery, they were more antenna than any amateur operator needed. And the directional antenna's orientation bothered me in the way that a professional observation bothers you, not emotionally, but technically. A Yagi pointed at a house 100 yards away is not trying to reach distant stations, it's listening to something local. I mentioned it to a colleague at work, another technician named Ray, who'd been in the industry longer than I had. And he agreed that the setup was odd, but said that some hams just overbuild because the equipment is the hobby, not the communication. And I accepted that because it was plausible, and because accepting it meant I didn't have to think about the alternative. I began scanning frequencies in my house. This was easy for me. I had the equipment as part of my work, a spectrum analyzer and several receivers that covered everything from HF to UHF. I found it on the second evening, a transmission on a frequency in the 400 MHz range, just below the FCK'd land mobile band, broadcasting a carrier signal with no modulation, just a steady tone, like a heartbeat rendered in radio waves. The signal was strong, very strong, consistent with a transmitter less than 200 yards away. One tracked the signal over the following week. It was always present, 24 hours a day. It didn't carry voice or data in any encoding I recognized. It was simply there, a constant presence at a frequency that no one had any reason to be using, emanating from the direction of Chester's house. I recorded it and played it back at different speeds, looking for embedded patterns, subcarrier data, anything that would explain its purpose. There was nothing, just the tone, steady and patient and continuous, a signal that existed for the sole purpose of existing, or for a purpose that I couldn't decode, which amounted to the same thing. I might have dismissed it as an equipment malfunction, oscillators drift, amplifiers leak. Old equipment produces unintended emissions. Except for what I found when I expanded my scan, there was a second signal. This one was weaker and intermittent, appearing only when I was home, disappearing when I left. I confirmed this by leaving my spectrum analyzer running with a logging function while I drove to Hazard for a full workday. The signal was absent from 7:12 a.m., approximately the time my truck would have left the hollow, to 5:47 p.m., approximately the time I returned. It activated within 3 minutes of my arrival. The second signal was on a frequency commonly used by wireless audio transmitters, baby monitors, room bugs, the kind of devices you can buy online. for $40 and hide in a lamp or a wall outlet. I searched my house with the systematic thoroughness of a person who does this for a living. I found it in the kitchen, inside the housing of a smoke detector that I had not installed. The transmitter was a small circuit board with a microphone element and a stub antenna, powered by the smoke detector's 9-volt battery. It was transmitting everything said in my kitchen to a receiver that, based on the signal direction and strength, was inside Chester's house. I found a second transmitter in my bedroom, behind the outlet cover plate, a third in the living room, inside a power strip that I hadn't purchased but that had appeared on my shelf at some point I couldn't identify, replacing one that I apparently hadn't missed. 3 microphones, covering every room where I spent meaningful time, broadcasting continuously to a man across 100 yards of creek water who had the equipment to receive and presumably record everything. I removed them. I did not confront Chester. I called the Letcher County Sheriff and the FCC regional office in Atlanta. The sheriff came. The FCC did not. The sheriff spoke to Chester, who denied everything and who, by the time the deputy arrived, had removed the directional antenna from his roof. The deputy told me he couldn't search Chester's house without a warrant, and couldn't get a warrant without more evidence than my say-so about radio frequencies. Because judges in Letcher County, he explained with the weary honesty of a man who has learned the limits of his jurisdiction, do not generally understand radio technology well enough to find probable cause in a spectrum analysis. I moved to Hazard the following month. I rented an apartment above a laundromat on Main Street, the kind of place where the ambient noise is constant, washers and dryers running from 7 to 10, the hiss of the water heater, the bell on the front door, and I found the noise comforting in a way that would have confused me a year earlier, before I understood what silence could contain. I still work the towers. I still drive through the hollows where the signals bounce and scatter off the limestone ridges. And I carry a portable scanner now, always, the way some people carry a weapon. Not because I expect to use it, but because the knowledge that I can listen gives me a measure of control over a world that I now understand is full of signals I can't hear, conversations conducted in frequencies that weren't meant for me, the invisible architecture of other people's attention, sometimes on a quiet frequency, late at night, when the atmospheric noise drops and the band opens up the way it does. In the mountains when the air is cold and still, and the ionosphere settles into its winter configuration. I hear a carrier tone, steady, patient, unmistakable, the particular sound of someone listening to nothing, waiting for something to fill the silence. I tell myself it's atmospheric. I tell myself it's equipment noise from a tower I maintain, leaking signal into the band the way old equipment does. I tell myself this, and I change the frequency and I drive on. And the mountains close around the road, and the hollow narrows, and the signal fades or doesn't fade. And I choose not to check which. I've hiked the Appalachian Trail in sections over the past 15 years, not as a through hiker, but as a section hiker who picks a segment each summer and spends a week walking it, accumulating miles the way some people accumulate stamps or coins. Patiently, without urgency, for the pleasure of the collection itself. By the summer of 2022, I'd completed most of the trail through Virginia and was working on the stretch through the Great Smoky Mountains in Tennessee and North Carolina, which is some of the most remote and physically demanding terrain on the entire AT, and which attracts a particular kind of hiker, serious, self-sufficient, comfortable with days of solitude in forests so dense that the canopy blocks GPS satellites, and the ridgelines run for miles without a road crossing. I was 6 days into an 8-day section starting from Newfound Gap, heading northeast toward Davenport Gap, when I stopped at a shelter for the night. The shelters along the 8 in the Smokies are 3-sided stone structures with chain link fronts, required stopping points because the Park Service mandates that hikers in the backcountry sleep in designated shelters rather than wild camping. This particular shelter, I won't name it specifically, Because the Park Service investigated what I'm about to describe, and I don't want to complicate anything. Held 8 people that night, which was capacity. 7 of us were hikers. The 8th person was already there when I arrived in the late afternoon. He was sitting in the corner of the shelter on a sleeping pad, leaning against the stone wall, and he did not have a pack. He had no visible gear at all. No pack, no food bag, no cook kit, no water filter, no trekking poles, no rain cover. He was wearing jeans and a flannel shirt and work boots, which is not what you wear 6 days into the Smokies backcountry. And he was clean, which is not what you are. 6 days into the Smokies backcountry, his hair was dry and combed. His hands, which I noticed because I was sitting across from him while I ate, were clean under the nails. He looked like he'd walked out of a house that morning, which was impossible because the nearest road was 11 miles in either direction, and the nearest trail junction with a road crossing was 9 miles behind me, and I had not passed him on the trail. I set up my gear and made dinner and did the things you do at a shelter, filtered water, hung the bear cables, talked briefly with the other hikers about trail conditions and weather, and the universal shelter small talk about where you started and where you're headed. No one addressed the man in the corner directly, and he did not speak to anyone. This is not as unusual as it might sound. Shelters attract the full spectrum of human sociability, and some people simply don't want to talk, and the trail culture respects that. But usually, non-talkers still perform the rituals. They cook, they organize their gear, they read a book or write in a journal. They at least unroll a sleeping bag. This man did nothing. He sat, he watched. His eyes moved from person to person with a slow, methodical attention that was not curiosity but inventory. The way you'd watch a room if you were cataloging its contents. One of the other hikers, a woman from Asheville named Patty, who I'd been leapfrogging with for 3 days, asked him if he needed anything, water, food, a headlamp. He said no. His voice was flat and without inflection, the kind of voice that doesn't invite follow-up questions, the kind of voice that exists in the narrowest possible bandwidth of human communication. Words without music, language stripped to pure function. Patty looked at me, and I looked at Patty, and we had the silent conversation that strangers have when they both recognize something wrong, but neither wants to be the one to name it, because naming it would require doing something about it. And what exactly do you do about a man who is sitting legally in a public shelter, and whose only offense is being inexplicably present and inexplicably clean? I slept poorly. The shelter was full, and the man in the corner did not sleep at all. I know this because I woke several times during the night. I'm a light sleeper in the backcountry. Always have been. The part of my brain that evolved to listen for predators still functioning at full capacity, despite several thousand years of civilization's effort to quiet it. And each time, he was in the same position, sitting upright, eyes open. At around 2 a.m., I woke to find him sitting in a different spot. He had moved from the far corner to the space directly beside me, silently, without waking anyone in a shelter where 8 people were sleeping within arm's reach of each other. He was sitting cross-legged on the bare stone floor, no sleeping pad beneath him, facing me. His eyes were open, and he was looking at my face. From a distance of perhaps 2 feet, I did not move, I did not speak. I lay there and looked at him, and he looked at me, and the moment lasted long enough that I could hear my own heartbeat in my ears and feel the particular cold of high elevation. Air entering my lungs in shallow, controlled breaths. Then he stood up, walked to the shelter entrance, unlatched the chain link gate, which squeaked, which meant he had opened it silently earlier, which meant he had practiced or prepared, and walked out into the dark. No flashlight, no headlamp. He walked into a forest at 5,000 feet of elevation at 2 a.m. with no light source. And the sound of his footsteps faded not down the trail, but up the slope, into the pathless woods above the shelter. In the morning, Patty asked if I'd seen the man leave. I told her what I'd seen. She told me that she had woken at some point in the night and found him standing over her. looking down, and that she had frozen and closed her eyes and waited until he moved away, and that she had not slept again after that. We reported it at the Davenport Gap Ranger Station. The ranger took our statements and said they'd had other reports that summer of an unidentified individual appearing at backcountry shelters in the Smokies without gear, without a permit, without a discernible point of origin. He showed us a log of incidents, 4 other shelters, spanning a 2-month period, each report describing essentially the same thing. A man in work clothes, no pack, clean, silent, present. At dusk, gone by morning. 2 of the reports mentioned him moving within the shelter at night, repositioning himself near sleeping hikers. 1 report, from a solo hiker at a shelter near Klingman's Dome, said the man had been sitting outside the chain-link gate in the morning, cross-legged on the ground, watching the hiker pack up through the wire. The ranger said they'd increased patrols, but the trail density and the remoteness of the shelter system made it difficult to locate someone who, in his words, knows the terrain better than we do. He said it with the particular frustration of a professional who understands that the landscape he's responsible for is larger than his ability to control it, that the Smokies contain 500,000 acres of forest, and that a person who wanted to live in them unseen could do so indefinitely. I still section hike. I have not returned to the Smokies. I've told myself it's because I have other sections to complete, other states to walk through. And this is true, but it is not the truth. The truth is that the Smokies feel different to me now. The forest there is among the oldest in eastern North America, and the rhododendron thickets grow so dense along the ridgelines that a person standing 10 feet off the trail is invisible. And the shelters sit in clearings that feel safe in daylight and feel like stages at night, lit spaces surrounded by darkness, visible from every direction, open to whatever walks out of the tree line and decides to sit down beside you and watch you sleep from a distance that is closer than love and closer than violence, and occupies a space between them that I did not know existed until I felt a man's breath at 2 in the morning and understood that there are forms of attention that have no name and no purpose and no end. My grandfather's house in McDowell County, West Virginia, was built in 1952 on a lot that had been part of a coal company town called Caperton, which no longer exists except as a name on old USGS maps and a few foundation remnants visible in the underbrush along Route 16 south of Welch. McDowell County has lost about 80% of its population since the coal industry collapsed, and the landscape reflects this. Houses standing empty, roads unmaintained past the last occupied property, entire hollows reverting to forest, with the slow patience of land reclaiming what was taken from it. My grandfather died in 2018 and left the house to my mother, who lives in Charlotte and has no use for a 3-bedroom house in a county with no industry and a declining tax base. So I volunteered to go up and prepare it for sale. I took 2 weeks off my job at a distribution center in Gastonia, North Carolina, drove up in October, and planned to clean out the house, make minor repairs, and meet with a realtor. The house was the last occupied structure on its road, a gravel lane that ran a 1/4 mile up from the county route and dead-ended at what had been the edge of the Caperton Company grounds. Past the dead end, an overgrown track continued into the woods toward the remains of the company buildings, and beyond them, up the hollow to the old mine entrances. The only other standing structure on the road was a house roughly 100 yards from my grandfather's. On the opposite side, set back into the hillside with a steep concrete block retaining wall supporting the front yard. This house was occupied. I knew this because there was a truck in the driveway and clothes on a line and a dog chained in the yard. A large mixed breed animal that barked in a continuous rhythmic pattern that suggested it had been barking for so long that the act had become autonomous. Disconnected from any stimulus, I never saw the occupant of this house, not once. In 2 weeks, I saw the truck move. It would be gone some mornings and back by afternoon. A dark green Chevrolet Silverado, mid-2000s. with mud on the wheel wells and a dent in the tailgate that had been there long enough to rust at the edges. I saw the dog get fed, because the bowl would be full, and then empty, and then full again. I saw lights in the windows at night. A blue-white flicker that suggested a television, always in the same room, always on until late. I saw a garbage bag placed at the road on Tuesday mornings, but the person who lived there was never visible to me, not on the porch, not in the yard, not passing a window. And this is relevant because of what I found in the well. My grandfather's property had a well, not the water supply. The house was on county water, but an old hand-dug well from the original property, predating the house, capped with a concrete lid and a rusted iron handle. It sat about 50 feet from the back of the house, near the tree line, partially obscured by a forsythia that had grown wild and bent under its own weight into a shape that was more wall than bush. I noticed the well because the cap was off, not broken, not damaged, removed and set beside the opening, propped against the stone wall of the well shaft with the care of a person who intended to replace it. The concrete cap weighed at least 80 pounds. It had not fallen off. It had been lifted and placed. I looked down into the well with my phone. Flashlight, it was dry. Had been dry for years, probably. The water table having dropped or shifted as the old mine workings changed the underground hydrology, the way they do throughout McDowell County, about 15 feet deep, lined with stacked stone that was dark with mineral staining. At the bottom, arranged in a pattern I could see clearly from above, were objects, personal objects, a pair of my grandfather's reading glasses, the kind with the brown plastic frames he'd worn for decades. A coffee mug I recognized, white with a blue stripe, the mug he drank from every morning, which should have been in the kitchen cabinet. A photograph, in a frame, face up, showing my grandfather on his front porch, a flannel shirt, folded neatly, a Bible open, pages facing up but unreadable from 15 feet. These objects had been taken from the house. The glasses had been on the knitstand. The mug had been in the cabinet. The photograph had hung in the hallway. The shirt had been in the bedroom closet. Someone had entered the house, selected these specific items, carried them to the well, climbed or lowered themselves 15 feet down, and arranged them in a deliberate display at the bottom. The arrangement was not random. The glasses sat on top of the open Bible. The photograph leaned against the mug. The shirt was folded beneath them like a cloth on an altar. The composition was intentional, considered, the work of a person who was making something, a memorial, an offering. I don't know what to call it because I don't know what it meant. I only know that someone who had access to my grandfather's house and knowledge of which objects were his, specifically his, had taken them and placed them in a hole in the ground, with a reverence that frightened me more than vandalism would have. I checked the house. The doors had been locked, the windows were intact, but the back door's lock was the kind that could be defeated with a credit card. The spring bolt style that every homeowner means to upgrade and never does. Inside, the absences were visible once I knew to look. The gap on the knitstand, the empty hook in the hallway, the space in the closet where the shirt had hung. I called the McDowell County Sheriff. A deputy came, looked at the well, looked at the objects, and said it was strange, but that without evidence of who had done it, there was little to pursue. He looked at the house across the road and said he'd talk to the neighbor. He walked over, knocked, waited. The dog barked. No one answered. The deputy said he'd follow up and gave me his card. I finished the clean-out in 5 days instead of 14. I worked during daylight hours only and drove to Welch each evening to sleep at the only operating motel, a place called the Elkhorn Inn that sits on Route 52 and that serves, like most things in McDowell County now, a population that is more memory than presence. I did not stay in my grandfather's house after finding the well. The house felt different to me, or rather my understanding of the house had changed. It was no longer a family home where my grandfather had lived alone for 37 years. It was a house where my grandfather had lived under observation for some portion of those years, adjacent to someone who knew which objects were important to him. Who knew the brown plastic frames and the blue-striped mug and the flannel shirt he favored? Who had paid the kind of attention that requires proximity and patience and a motivation that I cannot name because I don't understand it and I am not sure I want to? I replaced the well cap before I left, and I weighted it with a cinder block, and I told the realtor about the neighbor and about the well, and she said the house would be hard to sell regardless, given the county. And she was right. It has not sold. It sits on its lot on the dead-end road, and the forsythia grows wilder each year, and the neighbor's dog still barks in that rhythmic, autonomous pattern, and the well sits under its cap. And at the bottom of it, arranged with care on the dry stone, my grandfather's things wait in the dark, like an offering to something that never came to collect them. My grandfather lived in that house for 37 years. He knew his neighbor. Across the road, he must have, in a hollow with two houses, you know the other person. And I think about what that knowing looked like from the other side. What my grandfather represented to someone who lived 100 yards away in a county that was emptying out around them. Someone who watched an old man come and go for years and who, at some point, climbed down into a dry well with a pair of reading glasses and a Bible and built something in the dark that only they understood. The forsythia blooms yellow in April. Along that hollow, wild and untended, the way everything in McDowell County grows now, without anyone watching, or so you'd like to believe. I managed a small public library in Watauga County, North Carolina, for 6 years, the kind of library that serves as community center, warming station, internet cafe, and de facto social services office for a rural population that has limited access to all of those things individually. The library sat on a state road between Boone and Blowing Rock, in a converted farmhouse that the county had purchased in the 1980s and outfitted with metal shelving, fluorescent lighting, and an HVAC system that was perpetually either too aggressive or entirely absent. My job was part librarian, part facilities manager, part counselor, and part diplomat, because a small rural library attracts everyone, and everyone includes people whose needs exceed what a building full of books can reasonably provide. One of our regulars was a man I'll call Eugene. He came in every weekday at precisely 10:15 a.m., sat at the same computer terminal, the one in the back corner, facing the wall, with the screen angled away from foot traffic, and stayed until 4 p.m. He used the computer for what appeared to be the same task every day, listening to audio files through a pair of over-ear headphones that he brought in a cloth bag. He'd sit with his eyes closed, headphones on, occasionally writing in a small notebook, and at 4 o'clock he'd pack up and leave. Eugene was quiet, clean, polite in the minimal way of a person who has decided that verbal interaction is an energy expenditure. He has budgeted carefully. He never caused problems. He never asked for help. He checked out books occasionally, always nonfiction. Always topics related to audio engineering, sound recording, or local history. He paid his fines promptly, in exact change, which he produced from a small zippered pouch inside his cloth bag, with the precision of a person who had counted it at home. He used the restroom and left it cleaner than he'd found it, in the taxonomy of library patrons, and I had developed a detailed taxonomy over 6 years. The way anyone who works with the public develops systems for categorizing the patterns of human behavior that present themselves daily. Eugene was ideal. He was the patron you wanted every patron to be, which is perhaps why it took me so long to see what he was. I learned from the county property records, which I accessed not out of suspicion, but because a colleague mentioned that Eugene lived near her sister, and I was curious in the casual way that small-town librarians are curious about their regulars, the way you want to know just enough about a person to understand the shape of their life without intruding on it, that he owned a house on Meat Camp Road, about 4 miles from the library, on a parcel that backed up against a large tract of national forest. He had no listed employer. He received no mail at the library, which some of our patrons did. He was, as far as the public record was concerned, a person who existed quietly on the edge of a small community and asked. Nothing of it except a computer terminal and 6 hours of daily silence. The thing that changed my understanding of Eugene was a mistake. His mistake, specifically. He left his notebook at the computer one afternoon, and I found it during closing. Library protocol was to hold lost items at the front desk for 30 days, so I picked it up and glanced at it, not reading it, just checking for a name or contact information inside the cover. There was no name. What there was, on the first page, was my name, my full name, and beneath it, a date. The date I had started working at the library, and beneath that, a physical description of me that was accurate in a way that went beyond the observational. It noted a scar on my left wrist that is small and faded and that I cover with a watch band. It noted that I favor my right knee going downstairs. It noted the specific brand of reading glasses I kept on a chain around my neck. I turned the page. The notebook contained similar entries for every staff member, and I realized with a progressive chill that moved through me like a change in water temperature. For several regular patrons, physical descriptions, schedules, habits, the routes they drove to the library, the cars they drove, the names of their children. For one patron, a young woman who came in on Tuesday and Thursday evenings for the community college coursework computers. The entry included the notation, window faces east, light on until 11. Bedroom. I closed the notebook. I held it at the desk, and when Eugene came in the next morning at 10:15, I gave it back to him. I watched his face as he took it. There was no surprise, no embarrassment, no flicker of awareness that the notebook's contents were abnormal. He said thank you. He sat down. He put on his headphones. I called the Watauga County Sheriff that afternoon. The deputy who came was the same deputy who'd responded when we'd had a break-in attempt the previous winter. A man who understood the library and its clientele. I showed him the entries I'd photographed on my phone before returning the notebook. I know I should have kept it, but the instinct to return a patron's property was so deeply trained that I'd acted before I'd fully processed what I'd read. The deputy looked at the photographs and said it was unsettling but not actionable. That writing descriptions of people in public spaces was not a crime, and that the entry about the young woman's bedroom window was concerning but not a direct threat. He said he'd talked to Eugene. He did. Eugene stopped coming to the library. This is not where the story ends, it is where it turns. Because after Eugene stopped coming to the library, I received an envelope in the mail, no return address, postmarked from Boone. Inside was a USB drive. I brought it to the library and opened it on an air-gapped laptop we kept for exactly this kind of situation, donated media that might contain malware. The drive contained audio files, hundreds of them, each labeled with a date and a name. My name appeared on 37 files. I played one. It was a recording of me, speaking in my kitchen at home, on the phone with my sister, discussing our mother's declining health. The audio quality was extraordinary, not the tinny ambient capture of a hidden microphone in a room, but the close, intimate fidelity of a directional microphone aimed at a window from outside. I played 3 more files and stopped. One was a recording of me talking in my sleep. The audio was close, not from outside a window, from inside the room. The USB drive went to the sheriff. The investigation, such as it was, determined that Eugene had vacated his house on Meat Camp Road. He left no forwarding address. The house, when deputies entered, contained equipment, receivers, directional microphones, parabolic collectors, recording decks, hard drives. The hard drives were gone. The equipment remained, arranged neatly on tables and shelves, organized with the careful precision of a person who loved their tools and had left them behind only because the recordings were more important. The deputies described the interior of the house to me later. I asked, because I needed to understand, the way you need to understand any system that has been operating on you without your knowledge. They said the house was clean. They said there was no furniture in the living room, only equipment. They said the walls were covered in acoustic foam. They said there was a map, a hand-drawn map of the area surrounding the library, with addresses. marked, including mine, with lines drawn from each address to the library, and along each line, small notations that they couldn't fully decipher, but that appeared to correspond to times of day. I still manage the library. The computer terminal in the back corner is still there, and sometimes a patron sits at it, and I watch them for a moment. Before I catch myself and look away, I replaced every window in my house with double-pane glass, and I keep the curtains closed, and I don't talk on the phone at home anymore. I text, I email, I communicate in writing, in silence, in the particular privacy of words that make no sound, words that cannot be captured by a microphone aimed at a window from the darkness of a national forest boundary where the trees begin. And the listening begins, and neither one has an end that you can see. The mountains around Watauga County hold sound in strange ways. The hollows funnel it, the ridges reflect it on a still night. You can hear a conversation from a remarkable distance, the words arriving delayed and slightly distorted, like a memory of something said a moment ago in a room you've already left. I know this now in a way I didn't before. Not as a fact about acoustics, but as a fact about vulnerability, about the particular exposure of living in a landscape that carries your voice further than you intend, that delivers your private words to ears you didn't choose, that makes every sound you make a gift to anyone patient enough to listen. I own a small cattle operation in Allegheny County, North Carolina. 63 acres of rolling pasture and hardwood ridge along the New River near the community of Laurel Springs. It's not a large operation, 40 head of Angus, a hay barn, a equipment shed, and the farmhouse my wife and I have lived in for 19 years. The land borders the Blue Ridge Parkway corridor on its western edge, which means our upper pastures look out across the kind of long-distance mountain views that tourists drive hundreds of miles to photograph, and which I see every morning at 5:30 when I'm breaking ice off the water troughs in January, and don't give much thought to because beauty becomes furniture when you live inside it. Our neighbor to the north was a man named Lowell Grable, who owned roughly 40 acres that he did nothing with. He'd inherited the land from his father, who'd run dairy cows on it, but Lowell had let the pastures go to scrub and the fences fall, and the property had been slowly returning to woodland for the 20 years he'd owned it. Lowell lived in a small house on the lower portion, near the county road, and worked intermittently at a sawmill in Sparta. He was a quiet man who kept to himself and whose property bordered mine on a half-mile stretch of fence line that I maintained because he wouldn't, and because my cattle would get into his scrub and then I'd have to go get them. The clearing appeared in the spring of 2021 on the upper portion of Lowell's property, where the land rose toward the ridge and the scrub growth was thickest. A roughly circular area about 60 feet in diameter had been cut, not cleared with equipment, cut by hand with a chainsaw and a brush hook, the stumps low and the debris piled at the edges. The circle was visible from my upper pasture, a neat round absence in the otherwise continuous scrub. Like a pupil in a green eye, I noticed it because my cattle noticed it. They bunched at the far end of the upper pasture, away from the fence line nearest the clearing, which was unusual because that end of the pasture had the best grass. Cattle are not imaginative animals. They respond to stimuli, not atmosphere, and their avoidance was consistent and unanimous, which meant something concrete was bothering them. I walked the fence line and found nothing. No predator sign, no break in the wire, no dead animal attracting scavengers, just the clearing, visible through the trees, empty and round and wrong in the way that a perfect circle is always wrong in a natural landscape. Over the following weeks, I watched the clearing develop. Lowell was working on it regularly. I could hear the chainsaw in the mornings, the sound carrying across the hollow with the clarity that mountain air provides. He was refining the edges, making the circle more precise. He brought in a load of gravel and spread it over the ground. Tamping it flat, he installed a post in the center, a single wooden post, roughly 6 inches in diameter and about 8 feet tall. Set in concrete, he attached nothing to the post, It stood alone in the center of the gravel circle, the kind of marker that demands interpretation but refuses to provide one. I asked Lowell about it the next time I saw him at the feed store in Sparta. He was buying fence staples, which struck me as ironic given the state of his fences, and I said something casual about the work he was doing on his upper property. He said he was working on a project. I asked what kind of project. He looked at me with an expression that I have come to think of as the most unsettling thing about this entire experience. Not hostile, not evasive, but patient, deeply patient. The patience of someone who has been waiting for you to notice and is pleased that you finally have. The way a craftsman might look at you when you stop and examine something he's built. A quiet pride that exists independent of whether you understand or approve. He said, "You'll see." I didn't press him. I paid for my mineral block and drove home and told my wife about the conversation. And she said what she always says about Lowell, which is that he's odd but harmless. And I said what I always say in response, which is that those two qualities are not mutually exclusive, with a third quality that neither of us wanted to name. The clearing continued to develop through the summer and fall. A second post appeared, then a third, then a fourth, forming a rough square around the central post. Between them, Lowell strung wire, not fence wire but thin gauge wire, the kind used for antenna construction or electric fencing. Bright copper that caught the light. The wire formed a web between the posts, a geometric pattern that grew more complex each week, the lines multiplying until the clearing contained a structure that was part fence, part antenna, part art installation, part something that had no category I could assign it to. From a distance, it looked like a spider's web built by an intelligence that understood geometry, but not spiders too regular, too deliberate, too organized around a center that drew the eye and held it. Then the mirrors appeared, small circular mirrors maybe 4 inches in diameter, attached to the wire at various points, dozens of them. They caught the sun and threw light in patterns that shifted throughout the day as the angle changed, sending bright flashes across the hollow and into my pasture. The cattle would not go near the upper fence line at all now. The flashes of light hit my house in the late afternoon, brief and irregular, moving across the windows and walls like something searching. In October, I drove up the ridge to get a better look. From the parkway overlook above Lowell's property, I could see the clearing from directly above. The wire pattern, seen from altitude, was not abstract. It was a map, a precise, scaled representation of my property, my house, my barn, my fences, my pond. My driveway, rendered in wire and mirrors on a gravel circle in the woods. The central post stood where my house would be on the map. The mirrors were placed at the locations of my windows. I called the Allegheny County Sheriff. The deputy came, looked at the clearing from my property, and said it was unusual, but that a man had the right to build what he wanted on his own land. I told him to look at it from above. He said he didn't have access to a drone. I showed him the photographs I'd taken from the parkway overlook. He studied them and said he could see the resemblance, but that it could also be a lot of other things. He said he'd talked to Lowell. Lowell took the mirrors down after the deputy's visit. He took the wire down. He removed the posts within a week. The clearing was just a clearing again. A circle of gravel in the woods with nothing on it. A blank page where something had been written and erased. But he didn't fill it in. He didn't let it grow over. He maintains it. I've watched him from the upper pasture. He goes up there with a rake and a flat shovel, and he keeps the gravel smooth and the edges clean. The circle's geometry preserved with the same meticulous attention he gave to the wire structure. As if the clearing itself is the project now. As if the wire and the mirrors and the map were only one expression of whatever it is that compels him, and the empty circle is another expression. Simpler, but no less intentional. A space cleared and held open for a purpose he hasn't finished with. I see him up there sometimes, standing in the center of the empty circle where the post was, facing my house, standing perfectly still in a way. That doesn't look like rest, and doesn't look like work, and doesn't look like anything I have a word for. My wife says I should stop watching. She says that watching him watch me is its own kind of sickness, that the attention flows in both directions, and that I am becoming a participant in whatever this is rather than a subject of it. She may be right, but there is a difference between choosing to watch and being watched without choosing, and I maintain that difference even as I stand at my fence line with binoculars and measure the distance between a man and the center of a circle and wonder what it means. The New River runs north through Allegheny County, one of the oldest rivers on the continent, flowing against the direction you'd expect, carrying water toward Virginia and away from the mountains that feed it. It has been running north for 300 million years, long before any of us were here to observe it or be observed. And it will run north long after Lowell's clearing has grown over, and my cattle have gone, and the fence line between our properties has rusted to nothing. My cattle still won't graze the upper pasture. I've stopped trying to make them animals understand things about attention that we've talked ourselves out of knowing. I am a mail carrier for the United States Postal Service rural route, serving a delivery area in Clay County, North Carolina, that covers approximately 80 miles of mountain roads between Hayesville and the Nantahala National Forest boundary. I have driven this route for 11 years, 6 days a week, in a right-hand drive Jeep Cherokee that the USPS lets me use because the standard delivery vehicles cannot handle the grades and switchbacks that my route requires. In 11 years, I have learned every mailbox, every driveway, every dog, every seasonal change in the condition of every road surface. I know which culverts flood in April. I know which driveways become impassable after an inch of snow. I know which customers receive packages on predictable schedules and which receive nothing but utility bills and political mailers. A mail route, maintained for a decade, becomes a kind of intimacy with a landscape and its people. You don't know them socially, but you know the rhythm of their lives is expressed through the mail they receive. And there is a surprising amount of human truth contained in the size and frequency and return addresses of what arrives in a person's mailbox. There is one house on my route that I need to describe carefully, because the care I take in describing it is proportional to the care I've taken in thinking about it over the past 3 years, which is considerable. The house sits at the end of a single-lane gravel road that branches off the county route about 6 miles east of Hayesville, climbs steeply for a quarter mile, and terminates at a turnaround that is barely wide enough for my Jeep. The house is a cabin, hand-built from what appears to be locally milled lumber, with a metal roof and a covered porch and a chimney made from river stone. It is well maintained in a way that suggests the occupant has both skills and standards. The mailbox is at the bottom of the gravel road at the junction with the county route, which is standard for rural delivery. I don't drive up the private road. The occupant's name, according to the mail, is Dale Messer. I have never met Dale Messer. In 11 years of delivering his mail 6 days a week, I have never once seen him. I have never seen a face in a window, a figure on the porch, a silhouette moving behind a curtain. This is not entirely unusual. Some rural customers are simply not home during delivery hours, or they're inside, or they're on the far side of their property working and can't hear the mail truck. But 11 years without a single sighting, when I deliver at varying times between 10 a.m. and 3 p.m., depending on my route's daily sequence, is unusual. It is, if I'm being honest, unique on my route. Every other customer, in 11 years, I have seen at least once. Most I have seen hundreds of times. Dale Messer exists to me as a name on an envelope, a mailbox that empties itself. Between my visits and a cabin at the top of a road, I do not drive. What Dale Messer receives in the mail is where this becomes something I think about more than I should. For the first several years of my route, his mail was normal utility bills from the County Water Authority and Appalachian Power, the occasional catalog from Duluth Trading or Tractor Supply, junk mail, a subscription to a woodworking magazine that arrived on the second Tuesday of each month in a plastic sleeve. Then, approximately 3 years ago, the mail changed. He began receiving letters, handwritten letters, in business-size envelopes with no return address, postmarked from various towns in western North Carolina: Hasville, Murphy, Andrews, Robbinsville, Bryson City, 1 or 2 a week at first, then 3 or 4, then daily. The envelopes were all the same, white, standard, sealed, with his name and address written in a hand that was consistent across all of them, suggesting, "A single sender. I am a mail carrier. I do not open mail. I do not examine it beyond what is necessary to sort and deliver it." But the volume and consistency of these letters was notable. And I noticed, in the way you notice anything that deviates from an established pattern. And then I noticed something else. The letters bore my name, not on the address line. On the address line, they said Dale Messer. But in the lower left corner of each envelope, where a sender might write @ and R, a reference number, there was a small notation in the same handwriting: my name, my first and last name, written small, in pencil, on every envelope. I reported this to my postmaster. She said it was strange, but not a postal violation. She said the mail was properly addressed and properly stamped, and it was my job to deliver it. She said if I was concerned about my safety, I could file a report with the Postal Inspection Service, which I did. An inspector called me back 2 weeks later and said they'd looked into it, and the letters were being mailed from various post offices across the region, and there was no law against writing someone's name on an envelope. The letters continued. Daily, my name on everyone. Delivered by my hand to a mailbox at the bottom of a road leading to a house where a man I have never seen apparently reads them and, presumably, writes them and mails them from a different town each time and puts my name on them in pencil, in the corner, small and precise, like a signature or a dedication or a claim. Last month, I found something new in Messer's mailbox, not delivered, placed, a letter addressed to me, in my name, at my home address, in the same handwriting. It had not been mailed. It had been placed in his own mailbox, facing outward, positioned, so that it would be the first thing I saw when I opened the box. Inside was a single sheet of paper with a number written on it. The number was 4117. I counted later. I have delivered mail to Dale Messer's box approximately 4117 times since I started my route. He had been counting every delivery for 11 years. The precision of the number is what undid me. Not an approximation, not about 4,000, but 4117. Which meant a system, a record, a daily notation made with the discipline of a bookkeeper or a scientist or a person for whom the act of counting had become inseparable from the act of watching. Each number a confirmation that the ritual had been completed, that I had come to his mailbox and opened it and placed the mail inside and closed it and driven away, and that he had been there, somewhere, counting. One requested a route transfer. The USPS, in its bureaucratic patience, has told me that transfers for rural carriers require a vacancy on another route and that my seniority does not currently qualify me for the available options. I have been told to wait. I am good at waiting. The Postal Service teaches you that, but I am less good at waiting now than I was before, because waiting has taken on a new quality, a resonance it didn't used to have. Waiting is what Dale Messer does. Waiting is what the number represents. And every day that I wait for the transfer, I drive the 80 miles, and I open the mailbox at the bottom of the gravel road, and the letters are there, daily, my name in the corner in pencil. And I place them inside with the other mail, and close the box and drive away. I do not look up the road toward the cabin. I do not think about what is written inside the letters that bear my name on the outside. I do not think about a man sitting in a hand-built house on a mountain in Clay County, maintaining a count that will continue as long as I continue to drive this route. A count that started the first day I put mail in his box, and that will end, I suppose, only when I stop. And I wonder sometimes, in the part of my mind that I try to keep quiet, whether the count is the point or whether the count is a measure of something else, something I am a part of whether I consent to it or not. The way a river is part of the landscape it runs through and has no choice in the running. The Nantahala Forest holds its green deep into October in Clay County. The laurel along the roads stays thick, and some mornings when the mist sits in, the hollows and the gravel roads disappear into it like sentences that trail off before they reach their point. I sit in my Jeep at the bottom of that road, and I wait a moment before I open the box. And I listen to the particular silence of a mountain that is not silent at all, but full of a presence I cannot see. And I open the box, and the letters are there, and my name is there, and I add one more to the count and drive on.